it seems like the entire Western world suffers from the same problem. And I call it abstract multiculturalism. And I think that this is precisely what the Australians hate, although they haven't exactly phrased it in that way. Right, so there have been several marches in Australia in the past few days. We have marches here in Sydney, in Melbourne, in Perth, Brisbane. You see here, I'll take the sign off. The Australians are essentially waking up to the problems of abstract multiculturalism. Yep. And I don't know, I think it's a nice thing to watch when you see people flying the flag of their countries. Personally, I like it. I'm not one of those people who say, when I see this, I'm afraid. I actually like it. I know where I'm at.
Yeah, in their own country. I've said this a number of times. Nationalism across the world in your own country, right? I'm pro-Indian nationalism in India. I'm pro-Australian nationalism in Australia, absolutely. Yep. And I made a video with Nate, Mr. H Reviews, on our channel, The State of Politics. Do consider looking at that one. I made a video with him just last night. I don't know when it's actually going to go up. But I'll say exactly the same take, is that the Australians are our brothers. They're more than cousins, even. They're absolutely in the Anglosphere, if you like, even if they're on the other side of the globe. And years ago, in the 90s and even the early 2000s, they had a super-based immigration system, literally the Australian Navy sending boats back in the north of Australia, where boats would come down from Southeast Asia. And they would send them back. At some point in the 2000s, that got abandoned, I suppose, because they're suffering from exactly the same as everywhere else, just being flooded by foreign peoples. And so to see them turn out like this, brilliant.
Including massive
love
numbers of Indian students.
Go for your life.
And at some point, they just really opted for leftist governments. And the last government is very leftist. Yeah. And they won, I think, the largest number of seats they have ever won in any previous election. That was I think in May 2025.
Which is surprising, because during the COVID years, they got it really bad, didn't they? During the COVID years. So it's surprising to see they went even further left, or at least stayed as far left as they were. You would have hoped that didn't happen. But, I mean, we can't complain. We voted in Labour, so...
And I'm also told that they are far more to the left than people in the UK.
Really?
Generally speaking, and that the people who are protesting right now are beginning to understand the problem, but they haven't exactly phrased it as you know, they don't have the discourse that the UK has developed here, at least certainly in alternative media. Now, maybe I'm completely wrong. If I am, please tell me in the comments and I'll retract that.
We'd love to hear from more.
Right, so we had several marches in Australia in several places, and there were several things that the establishment really liked, such as there were efforts to co-opt the marches by neo-Nazis, and that was all the establishment took, and they branded all the protests as essentially far-right extremist neo-Nazi protests.
Of course they did. That's all they've really got, right?
Yes.
That's all they've really got anymore, is to attempt that gambit.
What they don't understand is that if you present every single sane position as far-right and Nazi, the response is eventually going to become, well, yeah, fine.
Right. What else? Yeah.
It's more like the issue is to get as many people as possible to identify in ways that the majority of the public is against, in order to portray the leftist government who wants to pursue abstract multiculturalism as the defender of Western civilization, and all these people as essentially its nemesis. As we have here, George Free says, today the march has been branded by state premiers and mainstream media as racist, hateful, and a Nazi-led event. Footage of violent Nazis at the event are being extensively broadcasted on TV, while ignoring all the good and decent Australians who came to protest mass migration and who opposed any visible Nazi presence. But from the establishment, and to be fair, they would do that regardless.
Yeah.
They would do that regardless, let's be honest. Also, we had people with placards of a cop killer. I think that's definitely agent provocateur.
Yep.
Yeah,
and
looks like it, yeah.
You remember when they had this guy speak as a supporter of reform, who turned out to be an actor?
Yes. right before the election,
right
wasn't it?
before the election, in order to try to say, well, Nigel Farage is far right, whereas we'd consider him far too liberal. Or the time where they had a bunch of Nazis attend, I think it was a Trump rally, but it turns out that they were there at the instigation of Never Trump Republicans.
Yeah.
So you've seen a couple of these incidents where these random people emerge with extremely provocative views that are outside of the mainstream and that are outside of what, say, Trump or Farage are actually endorsing. And then they are used as lightning rods by the media with the aim of focusing attention on them and with the aim of spreading the narrative that this is what the entire movement is all about.
Yep.
So we've seen this done a bunch of times throughout the Anglosphere. This isn't the first time that it happens. It is going to keep on happening. It's no reason to stop and it's no reason to change, but people should be aware that these provocations are ongoing and that there's a good chance that these people were feds. I mean, Jan 6, we had so many feds participating in January 6 and who were clearly at the forefront of trying to instigate violence.
Yeah.
So we see this kind of tactic being deployed by the state all the time. It shouldn't surprise us. I remember a friend of mine who's a journalist with the BBC, one time during some Iraqi protests, there was a memorandum shared between Iraqi security forces saying, please, could you stop sending your own feds? There's too many of them. We're trying to figure out how many people are actually protesting and who they are.
Right, yeah.
They were tripping all over each other.
Agent provocateurs are certainly a thing. That's definitely a thing. It's not paranoid. Not tinfoil hat to say that it's a thing being used today.
Again,
absolutely.
The theme that I'm repeating across both of your segments is that these guys are learning from fucking Baathists.
Right.
Yeah.
And
it's old. Sorry, Steve, just to quickly say. I mean, it's not a new thing.
Not at all.
Right. I've been reading recently about the 1917 revolution, or the end of the Tsarist regime. The amount of agent provocateurs that were used then. So it's not a new thing. In fact, you could go back centuries and different factions will use agent provocateurs. It's certainly happening now.
Yep.
Also, Drew Pavlou is doing really excellent job in monitoring things like the events of these marches. Do give him a follow. Also, that I've told him that I think we should discuss at some point here, perhaps an interview of something. He shows you some of the clips from these marches that the establishment doesn't want to show you because it conveniently wants to demonize people. Right, so we have here the BBC saying thousands attend Australia anti-migration rallies, and as you'd expect, they are basically trying to say these are all spreading hates, far-right links, extremists, right-wing extremists. They're talking about, again, neo-Nazis. The Guardian does the same thing. All mainstream media, as you would expect, are trying to claim that concerns that the protesters had are extremist concerns and you're not allowed to have them. And that's essentially what they're doing. They're doing exactly what you said in the previous segment. They said our agenda is inevitable, get on board with it or else.
Yep.
That's exactly what they are doing. We have here Al Jazeera. Yeah, I mean, no one is surprised that they are saying the same thing. RNZ, right. So the same thing. Now, what I want to say is that I've seen several claims by Australian politicians, and it seems to me that they are suffering from what I said in the very beginning of the segment, can be described as abstract multiculturalism, which isn't exactly the idea that different groups can coexist, but it's the idea that just about any group is compatible with any other group. Because Australia has, I think, around 300 languages, different groups. It's not exactly that it's a place where, there's one monoculture and that's it alone. It's, in a way, not in a DEI sense, but it is a diverse place. But the point that what these protesters are trying to point out is that not just any culture is compatible with any other culture.
Yep.
And they are citing the same things we are talking about on a daily basis on this podcast, and generally speaking, in the online right of the Western world. But I think if we look at the statements of these politicians, I think we may see I hope it's not the future of the Anglosphere, and I also hope it's not the future for Australia specifically. But they are making a number of pronouncements that are absolutely senseless, and when they do make sense, on the rare occasion they do make sense, they're incredibly catastrophic when it comes to their consequences. So here we have obviously the Australian government portraying all the marches that were pro-Palestine as legitimate marches, and all the marches that were pro-Australia as bad and neo-Nazi marches. And they conveniently don't talk about the amounts of Sieg Heiling you can see in pro-Palestinian marches. They just don't want to talk about. That's not undemocratic for them. That's not against their democracy. So it's incredibly hypocritical. But let's see here. Again, Drew Pavlou shows us a comment by Labour Premier of Victoria, Jacinda Allen. Australia is a nation of foreigners. She says this. We don't have to play it, but it's Australia is a nation of foreigners. What does that even mean?
It's basically misplaced original sin. Yeah. Instead of accepting that we are all afflicted with original sin, it's attributed mainly to whites. And so the whites become foreign in a country like Australia as a way of saying, no, we're sort of all equal. But what it actually implies is that the very obvious Anglo heritage of Australia is erased. And then you can say that the Hindu caste system is just as Australian as, people who settled the continent in the 1700s. Or you can say that Pakistani Islam, which even the Arabs find a bit insane, is just as Australian as Anglican Christianity. So there's a real misplaced religious motive there, not just psychological, but religious.
I think,
and they use it to undermine being Western Christian.
I think fundamentally what they are hinting towards is that there is no Australian identity. That's
precisely.
it. Because any identity is exclusive. Some people may not want to stomach it, but any identity is exclusive. Otherwise, we would just say humans. It's not the same thing as say Australia is a nation of humans. It doesn't mean anything. But what they're saying is Australia is basically not going to have an Australian identity.
Yep.
And when they mean this, precisely as you said, for us, they are targeting the Australians who are descended from the Anglosphere.
Yep.
That's exactly what they're saying. Here we have another statement saying that there is no such thing as an Australian people or an Australian national identity.
Yeah, I think the people who fought in World War II would beg to differ.
Yeah, right.
I think the Australian military would beg to differ.
Andrew Lay just says extremism isn't who we are. Well, that's again an issue of identity. That's an exclusive statement. It says we are not extremists. They are the extremists. But in order to have an identity, you need to have a regimented. So you need to be something.
Yeah, exactly.
So what he's doing is he is saying all the people in Australia who marched against this agenda of the leftist government of Australia, they're extremists. I mean, technically, this is an extremist thing to say, but okay, some people may not care about this. Again, here, the Deputy Mayor of Sydney, Zan Maxwell, describes every single person who attended the March for Australia as trash. Trash, yeah. And they're saying we need to work hard to safeguard our social cohesion. Now, that's very interesting because the people who marched do care about social cohesion.
Yeah, right.
The overwhelming majority of people who did so, they do care about social cohesion.
The double think, the double speak involved in that is... It's straight out of 1984. Yeah. It really is.
Straight out of 1984. It's like, we are a nation. We're going to be an incredibly inclusive nation to the degree that there is not going to be a distinction between Australians and foreigners.
And that's what social cohesion means.
Exactly.
That's social cohesion.
Exactly.
So I just looked up this guy, and apparently he's a homosexual. This is the kind of person who endlessly demands inclusion. And this is the kind of person who demands that his identity is respected and that his unique experience is respected and so on and so forth. And everybody who disagrees is trash.
Exactly. So
you can't get respect this way, and you can't stop people from noticing if you speak to them this way.
So what the issue is here, and it's good to get the point across, is that social cohesion is not just a catchphrase that the government can use and just constantly say, now you're supposed to go boo, or now you're supposed to applaud. It's not that. It's a very specific thing. You can't understanding unless you bring in the notion of culture. And not all cultures are compatible, because cultures are a pattern of sentimentality, values, institutions, practices, and actions. So when you want social cohesion, you need to have a culture, or at least a multitude of cultures that have a very significant degree of overlap and continuities. You can't just have a non-discriminate melting pot. I mean, it just can't happen.
To state the obvious a little bit, to bring up a talking point which may be sort of a bit 2017, but if you talk about culture and in-groups, out-groups, and social cohesion, if sort of the pro-Palestine faction, the Islamic faction, how well will LGBTQ communities or the Aboriginal community do then?
Yeah.
If Australia as a state became truly sort of Islamic, how well would they treat the Aboriginals? Well, we've actually seen throughout history how Islamic states often treat the indigenous Aboriginal peoples of the lands that they find themselves in control of not too well. They don't fare too well usually.
Nope.
The thing is that lots of people from in the West, they descend either ethnically or culturally from Europe, and within Europe there were more cultural continuities. There were significant cultural continuities, and they started thinking on this road. And then it was also the religious bit. You could say that in some cases, Catholicism, especially in Latin America, has played a role building some continuities between Latin American cultures and some European cultures.
Yep.
It sort of happens, but you can't just have any kind of non-discriminate cultures coexisting, especially when their values are fundamentally clashing. And here we have an example of anti-Australian comments by someone there called Syed Haider Kazmi, who says these fifth-generation descendants of British prisoners, the English migrants, have to go back to England first before asking other migrants to leave. This beautiful, holy and golden land of Australia belongs to the Aboriginals. Now, why is that not hate speech? Why is that not extremism?
And this guy happens to be, from his name, either Iraqi or Iranian or Afghan, maybe Shia.
Yeah, so that's not a problem for the leftist Australian government. And that's okay for them.
Insane.
Right, so now one of the main ways in which people find things out is alternative media, because mainstream media to a very large degree is captured, perhaps overwhelmingly so. So the Australian government is contemplating a ban on social media for under 16s. And they are talking about it because they essentially don't want people to find out about what's going on. They want to say that they care about the safety of people, but actually what they want is to prevent criticism of
control the information space.
And we have here this person.
If you're under 16, time is running out for your time on social media. Just 100 days left until the Albanese government's social media ban begins. And today the government has released a report, and it says it believes the ban will be effective because of the technology that is available. There are three main ways that age bans will be enforced.
So I don't think any person would doubt that what they want to do is silence criticism, and try to say that basically we are going to silence criticism while masquerading as making the internet safer for under 16s. We've seen it a lot. Right, so we have several deranged politicians constantly saying multiculturalism. They repeat it as if it's just, you're supposed to clap. That's all they care about. But they don't talk about the issue of coexistence and the values that cultures are supposed to be pro or against. That's why when it's abstract multiculturalism is just a ticking time bomb, it's a powder keg, because you have people with occasionally with directly clashing values and ways of life. It can't happen forever. And I have been told that Australia doesn't publish data of crime by nationality. Its government is trying to hide it. In many ways, the UK government is trying to do the same thing. Mm-hmm. But so what I want to show to you is that there seems to be a pattern in Europe, and show you some data which could be the case that they apply and show trends in Australia. And I can't be blamed for anything, basically, because the government doesn't publish data. So yeah, when the government says, I'm not going to publish data, people will speculate, because it doesn't exactly scream trustworthiness, let's be honest. So we have here Restore Britain giving us data about sexual assault by nationality. And what we see here is a theme that we see whenever we criticize multiculturalism, especially the way it's promoted in Europe, continental and otherwise. We see several groups that are vastly overrepresented in crime. So you will regularly hear people saying, well, more Brits are committing crime than people from X, Y, or Z group. The question is, they very frequently divide it by the total numbers of the population. And when they talk about crime per capita, a completely different picture emerges. So here we have sexual assault by nationality. We have the United Kingdom here towards 2.66, and we have here Afghanistan, Eritrea, Namibia, Chad, vastly overrepresented. So they're per capita, yeah, vastly overrepresented. That definitely requires discussion. This definitely requires discussion. It's not a virtue to pretend as if this isn't happening. It is happening. The same thing, the number of foreign sex offenders in British prisons is soaring, especially after 2021. It just seems to be skyrocketing.
Thanks, Boris.
Sexual offences in London, we see the same trend. Again, you see this. Some groups are vastly overrepresented in sexual offences in London. That's not only the UK. It's not just the entire UK or just London. We have also the same thing in countries like Denmark, where especially they seem to be having a problem with Somalians. And also there's a problem with Bild and Germany, where you'll see that some groups again are vastly overrepresented in crime. It happens sometimes with Syrians, especially the MENAPT countries, that is the Middle East, North Africa, Pakistan, and Turkey. So it seems to be the case that the very same trends are happening. We have governments who say they're multicultural. It seems that they are setting up a two-tier system against the native culture in every country. Mm-hmm. They are looking otherwise, they're pretending as if the crime that is to be traced to several minority groups and foreigners, especially people who break into countries illegally, is something that either doesn't exist, and when they can't deny it, they say basically that it is an entirely economic issue. So what they're doing is excess demoralization, and are telling to the natives, well, we have to tax you even more in order to give more money to these groups.
Pay them so they don't rape your daughters.
Exactly. The same thing happens, especially in Germany. It's appalling. And the German government just said now that they're going to commit with every party in the Bundestag against the AfD in speaking only positive about migration. So it seems to me that this kind of venture is absolutely devastating for native Western cultures and for Western culture at large. And I think that people in Western countries should wake up to this, hold the leftist governments that are promoting this accountable to it. Also bear in mind that sometimes it's just economic. It's just an economic issue for others. It's not just the left who is doing it. It's also multinational companies who just want cheap labor. They also do it, and sometimes they don't get mentioned as much, but they absolutely do it. And it seems like the entire establishment of the Western world is uniquely set up against people within the Western world protesting about the liquidation of their culture. And when they do, the establishment is trying to demonize them. So that's
dangerous times.
Yes.
Who are the men that pick for scraps amongst the ruins at the end of history? You should know, because you encounter them every day. Between the towering buildings of a fallen empire, we find the Fellahin, the historyless men, who know nothing of the turning of the cosmic wheel and find themselves outside of civilization itself. Cut loose from the great chain of being, they represent the loam into which our dying culture will return. That is, unless we choose to take up the burden once again. This Fellahin condition is the subject we explore in issue 4 of Islander magazine, on sale while stocks last and available worldwide at shop.lotuseaters.com.